Malcolm X was born on May 19, 1925, as Malcolm Little to a poor family in Omaha, Nebraska. Malcolm's father was an outspoken Baptist minister who was eventually killed by the KKK. Malcolm's mother never recovered from the death of her husband and was institutionalized, leaving her son to move back to Boston. He pursued a life of crime there for several years before being arrested and sentenced to 10 years in jail. It was in prison that Malcolm discovered the Nation of Islam and took up Islam as his major religion. At this point, Malcolm abandoned his last name in favour of X, calling his previous last name his slave name. Malcolm became a renowned minister for the nation, delivering moving but violent speeches across the country. Malcolm's call for action continued until he discovered that the NOI's leader was having illegitimate affairs with numerous women. Malcolm then left the nation and went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city of Islam. It was there that his views were purified. Malcolm learnt the true culture of Islam and had his views revolutionised. He still advocated violence, but believed that the integration was possible and that not all whites were evil. Maybe this view would have grown if Malcolm was not shot dead by the Nation of Islam members at a rally in Manhattan. He died on February 21, 1965, and more than 1,500 people attended his funeral. The funeral of a man who did so much for civil rights and who changed the face of America through his use of violence, his religion, and his views on black nationalism.
Malcolm X was not always the strong Muslim man he became known to be. In 1946, he was sent to prison on burglary charges, and it was here he became aware of the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam.
Objectively, the Nation of Islam and true Islam are very different things. The main difference is in their beliefs. The Nation of Islam believe that Wallenstein Fard Muhammad was a prophet of God, while true Islam believes that the Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet of God.
In 1964, Malcolm X became aware that a leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, may be doing extramarital affairs with a few of his secretaries. This greatly disillusioned X, and would be the beginning of the end for him. In his return from Mecca, X rejected the ideas of hatred and segregation for loving practices of acceptance and tolerance.
Islam is a religion like any other, and how it affects you comes down to the person you are. That being true, a large part of Malcolm X's public persona came from within his identity as a Muslim man. So the net gain for him was probably a positive one. That's not to say his relationship with Islam wasn't complicated. When he was released from prison, Malcolm X went on to be a highly influential part of the Nation of Islam, becoming a public face and leading recruiter. It is important to realise that the Nation of Islam that X joined and that Elijah Muhammad preached was not a regular stream of Islam that most Muslims followed. It was different and focused on more African American Muslims as superior to white people. Malcolm X later comment on the distance between the Nation of Islam and the true Islam, saying that the Nation of Islam was a perversion of something great. Malcolm X's relationship with the Nation of Islam became most fractious at the end of his life. After President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas, Malcolm X commented on this, saying that the death of the president was a case of chickens coming home to roost. What this means is that the death of the president was inevitable. His idea was to be able to apply this to the Nation of Islam and its followers. However, this speech was received terribly, as because Kennedy was so popular that his death was perceived as a national tragedy. Because of the political catastrophe that his comments made, X was removed as the primary speaker for the Nation of Islam. This was the beginning of the end for X. Whilst in Mecca, Malcolm X met people of all different races, countries and creeds coming together to praise. X said that he related to these people like brothers, and when he came back from Mecca, his viewpoint was changed radically. He rejected the Nation of Islam's ideas of white people being devils and started to see them as people who he could relate to. This move and change in viewpoint did not go down well with the Nation of Islam, and immediately X started to receive death threats that were continued the day he died. In February 21 of 1965, X was shot and killed by members of the Nation of Islam, a group that X had brought out of obscurity and into the light. Just months before his death, X said this about how he had changed.
Malcolm X was a violent man. There is no doubt that he was one of, if not the most, ferocious men associated with the civil rights movement. While leaders like Martin Luther King set out to achieve their aims through non-violent protests designed to shame whites and empower blacks, Malcolm X believed that the only way to achieve equality was through action. All this is true, but it's not the full story. While Malcolm X was a violent man, he was not some thuggish criminal determined to level American society to achieve his aims. To defend oneself was a key theme throughout Malcolm X's life. This idea came to its fruition following his pilgrimage to Mecca. Some question Malcolm X's means. The good he did for the civil rights movement is impossible to ignore. The violence he advocated was designed to allow African Americans to defend themselves from the terrible injustices done, not to spread terror or create chaos. Malcolm X thought that violence should only be used in self-defense and frequently diffused situations where riots could have occurred. In the autobiography of Malcolm X, Malcolm recalls dispersing a violent crowd at a race rally in Harlem. Those young teenage Negroes got upset and started milling around and yelling, upsetting the older Negroes in the crowd. The first thing you know, traffic was blocked in 4 directions by a crowd whose mood quickly grew so ugly that I really got apprehensive. I got up on top of a car and began waving my arms and yelling at them to quiet down. They did quiet, and then I asked them to disperse, and they did. Malcolm wanted the black community to be riled up, to be angry with how they were treated, and to realise that they should be able to fight back if they were assaulted. What he didn't want was wanton violence in the street. In his words, it is criminal to teach a man not to defend himself when he is the constant victim of brutal attacks. Malcolm knew that violence for the sake of violence was useless, but violence to defend oneself means that African Americans were finally beginning to consider themselves equal to whites. Previously, Malcolm's rallies had been staggeringly anti-white. He had preached that the white man was evil and lacked the capacity for good. He preached black nationalism and a forced separation of the two races for the good of all African Americans. While these messages may have alienated the white community, Malcolm X didn't care. The white community simply didn't factor into his plans. Malcolm's message was specifically designed to inspire confidence in the black consciousness and to make them believe that they were equal to whites, so that they could defend themselves without hesitation or guilt. His goal was to inspire and anger African Americans so that they could practice self-defense with impunity. This message changed after his journey to Mecca, a journey on which Malcolm witnessed true equality. In order to enter the holy city, every pilgrim had to wear a plain white robe. Everyone, no matter their race, age, gender or colour, was dressed the same and mingled with one another with no prejudice or injustice. On this trip, Malcolm was exposed to the true values of his religion and embraced the more peaceful nature of typical Muslims. While he retained his views that violence was necessary as self-defense, Malcolm's idea of separation from the whites vanished. Malcolm's views had changed. He realised that while violence was necessary, it should be practiced with caution, for, in his words, the white man is not inherently evil, but America's racist society influences him to act evilly.
Malcolm X, known for his harsh views against the white race, often referring to them as white devils in a number of speeches. But where did he get these radical views against the white race from? Malcolm X went to 2 schools which were both burned down by white racists. Along with this, his father, whom he got many of his views from, was killed by the Ku Klux Klan. His mother was also sent to a mental institute, which because of this he was sent to foster care, which had a serious impact on his mental well-being. Malcolm called his philosophy black nationalism, which essentially meant he wanted to segregate black and white people and make them have 2 separate governing bodies. Malcolm X's extreme views on the white race made Martin Luther King's views seem more reasonable and rational.
Malcolm X's views on segregation changed significantly throughout his life. His trip to Mecca and parts of Africa had a serious impact which made him realize that there are in fact some good white people. Before this trip, Malcolm was seen as a one-sided coin, with Martin Luther King being the other side of that coin. He believed that they needed to make a black nationalist party or a black army to fight the white establishment. Malcolm X believed strongly in an eye for an eye, which can be seen clearly in this quote taken from a speech done by Malcolm X. "I am a Muslim because it's a religion that teaches you an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It teaches you to respect everybody and treat everybody right, but it also teaches you if someone steps on your toe, chop off their foot." Many whites saw this as a radical standpoint, but he gained great support from members of the civil rights movement and his voice was heard loud.
Malcolm knew the impact he could have, and carefully curbed any potentially volatile situations, while simultaneously inspiring and encouraging the black community to take their equality from the whites. Despite his violent methods, or perhaps because of them, Malcolm X was one of the most influential men in the civil rights movement and was, without a question, a hero.